Let's make some throw pillows. Welcome back, guys. Throw pillows are so expensive for no reason, and they're so easy to make from thrifted fabric or scrap fabric. I make pretty much all my own pillows, so I'm gonna show you guys how to make some of my favorites. The first one I'm gonna show you guys how to make is this little billiards pillow. I would usually do an 8-ball, but I have so much 8-ball decor already in my house, so I did this like dark red 7-ball. And to mix it up even more, I used cheetah fabric.
Because slay.
I love this fabric so much that I actually made some shorts out of it too. They're like my favorite little boxer shorts, and I have that up on YouTube Shorts. The second pillow I'm gonna show you how to make is this lip pillow. I absolutely love her. I already have a pink one in my pink room, but I really wanted a red one for my living room. I'm also gonna show you guys real quick how to make one of these basic pillow covers. These are so nice because you can use the same inserts and change them out seasonally or based on your decor, and they literally take like 10 minutes to make. I've been seeing these ruffle heart pillows all over my Pinterest board, so I knew I needed one, and I made it out of this like moody red curtain that I thrifted. I love how it came out. I didn't even plan on putting these next two pillows in the video because I made them so long ago. I still love them, and I already had the footage on me making them, so I figured why not add them. The first one is this big chain pillow. I absolutely love it. It's perfect for draping over the back of the couch, and I feel like it just adds to that whole like rockstar girlfriend vibe I kind of have going on in the living room. I made this pillow from the scraps of that pillow. It was so easy, and I still love it, so I threw a little tutorial in for this one as well. And I'm gonna try a different recording style today, so let me know how you guys like it. And I feel like you'll get a lot more information out of it, but just let me know how you like it. Side note, I just did my nails yesterday. I think that's what kind of pushed me to record this video because I've had these pillows made for like the last month. Never got around to posting the video, so it was just meant to be. So we're starting out with this pillow, and I actually thrifted this fabric, but I had to dye it red because it was just normal leopard print, but thankfully red dye makes that really easy. The first thing I did was find a circle that was like the approximate size of how big I wanted the pillow. I just used the stand on one of my dress forms, and then I just cut another circle out of that. And then you're gonna wanna find something that's a circle for this little white part. And then I cut it out of vinyl because vinyl doesn't fray, so it leaves a really nice look. When I'm making these marks, I'm using a water-soluble pen because it's really easy to just erase off. And then I just cut the circle out with my rotary cutter. And I was leaving the edges raw, so I just really made sure that they looked perfect. If you don't do this with vinyl, you can always just do a zigzag over it so it won't fray as much. And then I just printed out the number 7 because I wanted it to look perfect, so I was not about to freehand it. And I just used a ballpoint pen because it still shows up on black material. It's like almost metallic. You can also cut the number out with a Cricut, but honestly, that just would have taken me a lot longer, so I just did this. And then I just used my scissors to cut it out, and I went super slowly around all of these curves because, again, I wanted it to be perfect. I'm also leaving this edge raw, so I didn't want it to be all scraggly around the edges, so I was just really precise with these scissors. And you kind of want to make the least amount of strokes as possible, if that makes sense, so it doesn't look all choppy. So you can see I went around those curves like really gently, and I think it came out pretty perfect. And then I'm going to use basing spray, which you're gonna want a box for because it gets everything all sticky. If you haven't used basing spray, it's like my favorite sewing tool ever. You don't wanna use pins on vinyl because it'll create holes in it. You also don't wanna have to like seam rip, so you also wanna make sure your bobbin is full, whatever, when you're sewing vinyl or leather. So basing spray is perfect because you don't have to use pins, and it's way easier than pinning. So I just sprayed that up real good with basing spray, and then it's just tacky. It's not like super duper sticky, so you can still kind of move it a bit, but once I had it in the spot I wanted, I just pressed it down real well, and it's temporary, but it'll definitely last while you sew it. So then when I went to sew it, I did a pretty big stitch length because it looks cleaner, I think, when you top stitch with bigger stitch length. And most importantly, I went really slowly. So I didn't speed this up so you can see. I was using the hand crank a bunch just to make sure I got up to the corners perfectly. Like you can see, it looks clean. So you don't want to rush through this at all, and you really just want to make sure that you put it correctly where it should be. Using the hand crank around the corners and stuff when you're doing applique like this just helps so much. Don't rush it or you're gonna regret it. And now I'm pretty much gonna do the same thing and use basting spray to stick that onto the main part. When you're figuring out where you want the placement of your number in the circle to be, you need to think about your seam allowances because it's gonna end up being smaller than it is. So I pushed it in like a ½ an inch more than I wanted it to be, especially because when you stuff pillows, it makes the appearance that it's even closer to the edge, if that makes sense, just because it gets thicker. So then I went ahead and sprayed that with basing spray and stuck it exactly where I wanted it to be. I also made sure that the placement of my fabric was up and down like it should be. The cheetah is going down. If you're using a textured material or something, you want to make sure that the grain is always going up and down. So place that on real good. And once again, I'm not using pins because that would leave holes in the vinyl and it would just look bad. When it's perfect, I went ahead, brought it to my sewing machine. And once again, I'm just stitching, leaving that edge raw, which is why I took so much time cutting it. And I'm using a pretty big stitch length, probably like a 4 stitch length. And just really taking my time because when you go around curves, you just want it to be perfect. It's a lot of moving it around. And now it's time to sew the front and the back together. So once again, you want to make sure that the grain of the fabric is both going the same way. You can see like my print lines up. It's, you know, it's not like crooked on the back. And then just go ahead and sew around in a circle. Make sure you leave about 4 to 5 inches that you don't sew shut so you can stuff it, and be sure to backstitch. You want to be able to turn it right side out and stuff it without it falling apart. So there, I'm turning it right side out. And then you just want to push all the curves out, like all your seams. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stuff it with an old pillow because stuffing is so expensive. So I definitely recommend using an old pillow, old plushies, or thrifting a pillow just to use for the stuffing. And you want to make sure you just stuff it really well because flat pillows are just not really a vibe. And then that like 4-inch part that we left open, I pinned it and just sewed it really carefully, top stitched it. You can also hand sew it here. Is this your YouTube debut? So next we're gonna be making this lip pillow. So I looked out and I thrifted this pink lip pillow that I used as a perfect template, but if you don't have one, you can just go ahead and make a sketch on some paper, make yourself a pattern that's in the shape of lips. And then I just went ahead and traced that onto the back side of my fabric. I was using this velvet fabric that I had scraps of, so it was just a lot easier to trace on the back of it. And then I cut it out with my rotary cutter. And here's a little hack I do is I just traced half of it and then I folded it over and used that as like the rest of the pattern just so it was perfectly symmetrical. And then I used the lips that I cut out to cut the next set of lips out. So I had 2 of the same piece. And then I still had to freehand the middle lip part. I'm using a water soluble marker and you definitely want to use that so the marks come out. If you use a pencil or something, the marks are not gonna be able to come out. So I would not recommend that at all. But these pens are only a couple dollars and they're like one of the best things you can have if you sew. So there I am just sketching it out carefully. And also the good thing about these pens is if you make a mistake, you can just use the water part and redo it. Kind of erases it. You only need the middle lip mark on one side. So once you have that done, you can put them right sides together, both pairs of the lips, and then just sew around the edges. You're almost gonna be making 2 tubes with the lips, so you have to fill them separately. So when you're sewing around, you have to leave 2 holes open to stuff it. So I left a hole open right here and right here just to kind of have it on opposite sides. Make sure you're backstitching as you sew around just so when you stuff it, it doesn't fall apart. And you can see that's where I left like 3-4 inches or so open to be able to stuff. And then we'll just close that up at the end. I only left like 2 inches on that one, so it was a little harder. And then just turn that baby right side out. And you really have to push around the edges on this one. You can trim your seam allowances if you want. I was just kind of worried about it bursting, so I didn't trim them that much because that can happen with pillows. When you're putting so much stuffing in them, it can kind of burst. So I don't trim my seam allowances a lot for pillows, but you can like make little cuts in them to help those curves look better. And then once it's right side out, you're just gonna go ahead and stitch along that middle lip line, top stitch. So I used like a 4 stitch length, I think. One end to the other end. I definitely took my time on this because top stitching is visible and you should always take your time when you top stitch. That's what it looked like before I started filling it. And then once again, I took an old pillow. I still had leftover filling in this and I just started stuffing it. It was really hard to stuff. So I was using like a chopstick to really push the stuffing in there. And I was using pens, whatever I had. But you definitely want to make sure you stuff your pillows fully. They just look a lot higher quality, I feel like, when you do that. Flat pillows, it's just not very cute. This was definitely the hardest one to stuff, but I feel like it was worth it. In the end, I just folded the holes in and I sewed over them with my machine. It's not the cleanest, but it still looks really good. And you can always hand sew it if you're more comfortable with that. If you're a beginner, I feel like hand sewing these might be easier. Up to you. The next one is just gonna be this typical pillow cover. It has a zipper, so it's removable and you can put whatever pillows. These are my checkered pillows that I'm not using right now. So I love making these pillowcases because they're really easy to store. You could have like 20 pillowcases and just fold them up and put them in your linen closet versus storing 20 pillows is like impossible. So this is just gonna be a quick little tutorial on this. You wanna make your squares a little bigger than the pillow you're gonna be using because you wanna add seam allowance. I think my pillows were like 17 by 17, so I did like 18 by 18 inch squares that I cut out because you don't wanna make them too loose or they won't look nice and filled out because I can't stand when pillowcases are like baggy. So honestly, if you just do the same size, it'll probably end up being fine. All you do is make a square, sew a zipper onto one end, sew the other 3 edges, and then just trim the zipper. It's literally that easy. And you want to make sure to keep the zipper open just so a few inches, just so you can turn it right side out. And that's it for the pillow cover. And then you just put whatever pillow insert you want in it. Now for the heart pillow, I didn't have a heart pattern, so I just made one real quick out of this packing paper that I had laying around. I just folded it in half so it would be perfectly symmetrical and used a pencil to kind of sketch out where I thought it should be. And then I cut that out with my rotary cutter. You want to remember too to add seam allowance, whether you add it in the pattern or just cut it onto the fabric. Make sure you make a good heart so it doesn't look wonky when you sew it. If you make it too angled, it might end up being like too wrinkly around this part. As you can see, it's already a little wrinkly, so don't make it too angled or it would look probably more wrinkly. So once I made the pattern, I just cut my fabric out of it. I love this fabric so much. It's even prettier in person. It's almost like a red and black iridescent. I feel like it's like so dark romance, vampire-y. I just love it. Just cut 2 heart pieces out from that pattern. And then I went ahead and cut, I think 3-inch strips for the ruffles. You wanna cut like a lot. I definitely use like yards of this fabric because you're gonna gather it. So depending on how you gather it, it's gonna shrink that much. And then I folded those strips in half and serged one edge. Then I went ahead and ironed it to have a nice crisp edge because this fabric frays so much. I definitely could not do any sort of raw hem with this, so I was just kind of to get a clean edge of the fabric. You could definitely also use like lace or ribbon or something for this, which would be a lot easier because you wouldn't have to finish it off. To do the gathering on this part, I went ahead and stitched along those strips at the very edge with like a 5 stitch length. Didn't backstitch, so I could go ahead and gather it by pulling the bobbin strings. That's called gathering if you've never done it before. You just do a basting stitch along the edge, and then by pulling those strings, it makes it look all gathered. So you get that ruffle effect. It took forever because it was like so many feet of the strips, but I wanted it really ruffly, so. And then once you make your ruffle piece, you kind of just want to sit it on your heart shape and figure out how long you need it to be and then sew it together. I did like a French seam so you couldn't really see it and it looked clean on both sides. Don't stress about being too perfect on this part because it's already gathered, so if you need to fudge it in places, it'll totally look fine. So then you want to pin the ruffle in between the 2 pieces of the hearts like you'll see here. But before I sew them together, I just pinned it to one side, like folded in, and I went ahead and put a basting stitch around the whole edge just because it's a lot of fabric to sew and using a basting stitch will always help you out in the long run. Whenever I want to put trims on a seam like this, I always do a basting stitch. You can see that's what it's already looking like, and then I just folded it back in so I could pin the 2 hearts right sides together with the ruffle on the inside. This was definitely the hardest pillow out of all of them to make just because of the ruffle and the pinning and everything. So if it doesn't come out perfect, you know, just try again. Gathering and sewing over all of the gathered trim can be tough. So I went over it with a pretty big seam allowance because I didn't want any of the seams to show from the gathering or whatever. So I used like at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And once again, I left like 4 inches open to be able to stuff it. So then I turned it right side out, trimmed all these random threads that I had, and then started stuffing it. This one was really hard to figure out like the stuffing placement too, to get it to not look so puckered in the middle, but I feel like I did a pretty good job. To shape it even more, I kind of like pushed all the stuffing into place once I got it in there. I just machine sewed over the opening with my machine, but once again, you can always hand sew that. It's probably a lot easier if you haven't done a lot of pillows because shoving this under your machine is not fun at all. So I made this chain link pillow forever ago, so I didn't have all the clips, but I have some of the clips, so this tutorial is gonna be a lot more fast paced. So I basically just made a bunch of tubes and then stuffed them and sewed them together. And to do that, I started out with 35 by 8 inch long rectangles and then sewed them into a tube and then stuffed the tube and then sewed it into a circle. And then every time you want to connect them before sewing the end, if that makes sense. So there's just one seam around the edge. You start with one circle and then you go ahead and take your next tube that's already stuffed and put it through like this and then sew it right there. That's how you assemble it. You can make it as big as you want, but I wanted mine really large scale to be like a chain over my couch. So I used 35 by 8 inch long rectangles. But I've seen people make like really small scale ones too for like scarves. My stitching on these were not the cleanest because it was so hard to sew over the already stuffed tubes. But it really looks fine and you can hide the seams in the links anyways, so you can't even tell. I didn't know how long I wanted that chain to begin with, so I had all of those tubes and I took some of the unstuffed tubes and just wove them into this pillow. The back is not woven because I didn't have enough for the back, but I just went ahead and did that. And then I lined this panel so the stuffing wouldn't come through, and then just sewed it right sides together. I love it because it's like a basic black pillow, but elevated with texture and like the little pattern. Just love it. So that's all for today. If you make any of these pillows, please send me a picture on Instagram. I would love to see how you put your own spin on them. And I'd love to see how cute they look in your house. What mine look like in my house. I don't actually have them all on the same couch, but just for picture purposes. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, let me know what video you want to see next.